أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين، نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونسترضيه ونستجيره، فإنه حقا من هدى الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد، النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى أصحابه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم يا رحمن يا رحيم، اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت، وعافنا فيمن عافيت، وتولنا فيمن توليت، وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت، وقنا شر ما قضيت، وقنا شر ما قضيت، فإنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك، وإنه حقا لا يذل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت، تباركت ربنا وتعاليت. It is, of course, all over the news outlets. In this time, what one cannot ignore or overlook, or indeed fail to speak about, is the plight of thousands of people right now in Turkey and in Syria due to the devastating earthquakes that killed thousands of people, injured thousands more, and has left hundreds of thousands of people homeless. And of course, what comes to mind when Allah reminds us, وَنَبْلُوَكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ فِتْنَةً وَإِلَيْنَا تُرْجَعُونَ. It is in the very fabric of the life we lead, the very logic of our existence, as Allah to remind us that we are constantly tested by evil and by good. We are constantly tested by what is ugly, but also by what is beautiful. And that the nature of iftitan, the nature of being tested by both in health and in sickness, is with this constant reminder that ultimately, when all is said and done, you will return to us. And the very nature of these fitan, of these tests, in health and in sickness, in well-being and in harm, لعلكم تذكرون or لعلكم تذكرون, that they are constant ayat, they are constant signs, so that perhaps we will remember. And perhaps we will remember that when all is said and done, we will return to the origin of everything, the Lord of everything, the maker of everything. I want to address a serious theological point, and one that unfortunately you hear and experience so many Muslims either being oblivious to or getting outright wrong. I read in the news that there is an Ayatollah, rather famous figure or well-known figure, Muqtada al-Sadr, who recently said that the earthquake and its victims are punishment from Allah. And in his opinion, it's punishment because Muslims failed to do enough about the insults to the Quran in Sweden. This view is quite plainly and simply utterly wrong. It is true that devastating earthquakes, like devastating natural disasters, could be on God's command to destroy a people that God wants destroyed. It is true that that could be. But it is never, to human beings, is an act of utter arrogance to say that this is such an example. Earthquakes, like the movement of wind, like volcanoes, like so many natural phenomena in our world, earthquakes occur on earth, but they also occur on every planet that Allah has created. Volcanoes are not limited to planet Earth, but again, volcanoes, like the laws of solar existence and the laws of creation itself, they are woven into the logic of existence. They occur on earth and occur in places where no human being lives and nothing lives. The earth itself, like so much of existence, is a living organism. The earth, yes, it is an example of life without consciousness, but it is nevertheless living. And there are laws that regulate the functioning of this living organism, very much like the laws that regulate the functioning of the living human being. A living human being undergoes biological processes all the time, that terminate the life of living organisms that live in the human being and on the surface of the human being. Every time you scratch a part of your body, there are microscopic, unseeable organisms that perish with this scratch. But you, as a living organism, they are of little concern to you because you do not have the consciousness vis-a-vis these living organisms. Your consciousness functions at a different level. And so your consciousness does not respond to what bacteria does on your body, does not respond to the life and death of billions and billions of bacteria that cover every part of your body. And you are really only aware of the existence of this bacteria in harm when, for some reason or another, they cause your nervous system to complain of pain and to inform your brain that something is going wrong. Similarly, the earth goes about of its business of living, oblivious to those who exist on it, who live on its surface. Earthquakes, volcanoes are but natural phenomena of a living organism. They occur where they occur due to purely physical laws coded into its creation. The earth itself is hardly conscious of what the earthquake does to thousands of people living on its surface. Now, some might say, well, wait. Couldn't God have created an earth that does not experience volcanoes and does not experience earthquakes? Well, why stop there? You could extend the question of couldn't God have created planets that don't experience earthquakes, don't experience volcanoes, that can sustain life without water? Could God have created organisms or beings that do not respond to a genetical code that determines so many of their characteristics? It is like asking, well, couldn't God have created human beings that don't need to eat? And once they eat, they don't need to eject the refuse out of their body. Couldn't God have created beings that don't need to go to the bathroom, that don't release gas, that don't burp, that don't scratch? Well, if you believe in God, you also believe that God could have. But it would not be the life we know. Why did the life we know, a life that demands, a life that responds to a covenant of trust by the maker of this life, and beings that inherit this covenant, and beings that discharge the obligations of this covenant, beings that share in the attributes of divinity because they have choice? God could have created a world other than the world we know. But here is the thing. What would that world be? What would this world be like? We have no clue. We can only speculate in the most speculative sense about a world in which human beings do not experience cold or heat, a world in which human beings do not need to eat and do not need to go to the bathroom, and a world in which Mother Earth does not need to undergo earthquakes or volcanoes for its very survival. How would that world look? Would it of necessity become Jannah? Is that what Allah is describing to us when Allah speaks of Jannah? A very different reality. A reality that is inaccessible to us by definition. It is like asking, why do we see the laws of physics replicated everywhere in which there is creation in this dimension that we live in. What are other dimensions of existence like? Do those who exist in other dimensions need to consume, need to go to the bathroom? Do they experience earthquakes? Do they experience illness? Do they experience maladies? Ask the followers of the new fad of modernity, the ghost hunters, the amateur ghost hunters that are everywhere, that buy expensive equipment to pick up on electronic voice phenomena, to catch a glimpse of a shadow hiding somewhere, to go in deserted buildings, to peek into a reality that is inaccessible to us, that is truly a part of the world of ghaib, a reality that apparently has very different laws. But that's all we can do, is peek. And then in the case of ghost hunters, this new fad, come to completely ridiculous and absurd conclusions upon which they have no way of understanding. Come to ridiculous and absurd conclusions as to a reality that they simply cannot comprehend. All we can say is that for reasons that we do not simply understand or know, and will not understand or know, in this dimension of existence, in this plane of existence, planets are like living organisms. And in order to live, they need the very physical laws that dictate their existence, mandate that they experience things like earthquakes and volcanoes. So earthquakes and volcanoes are naturally occurring, people. They are not dictated by God to punish anyone because they failed to respond to the burning of the Quran in Sweden or anywhere else. Are they God's will? Well, they are God's will to the extent that the natural laws of creation are God's will. But rather than concerning ourselves with what we cannot comprehend, why these particular laws of creation in this dimension of existence, while the earth is oblivious, like you are oblivious to whatever occurs on your surface, while the earth hardly notices that hundreds and thousands of people perish because it did what it had to do, God is not oblivious, and human beings should not be oblivious. Earthquakes are naturally occurring, but human suffering and the extent of human suffering is often a choice. Not the choice of individuals, but the choice of societies. all you need to do is to read the books of ancients, the books of scholars of old, that will very openly tell you this region of the world or that region of the world is a region of earthquakes. Earthquakes happen frequently in this or that part of the world. Modern science has developed the tools to replicate what the medieval scholars knew, that this region of the world or that region is prone to natural disasters like earthquakes or volcanoes. What do you do with this knowledge? It is a human choice to say it is only a matter of time before an earthquake comes. And we know, we are capable of saying that it is only a matter of time before earthquake of such and such magnitude comes. So there is a moral, social choice. Do we save up? Do we conserve our resources? So when the calamity comes, we can help. Or do we waste our resources on singing and dancing and tall buildings and all manners of distraction and satisfaction of the whimsies of human beings? There is a choice. What type of buildings do we construct on land that is prone to earthquakes? We know this as building codes in the modern age. Have you noticed that in certain societies, when earthquakes occur and volcanoes occur, the casualty list is far lesser than it is in other societies? Have you noticed that when natural disasters occur in certain parts of the world, regardless of the scale of destruction, the human cost is much lower than what we see in Turkey or Syria? And the reason for that is quite simply human planning. Human planning, which is discharging the covenant and obligation, the ethical and moral covenant and obligation that ties us to our Lord. The moral and ethical thing is a society that is sufficiently educated to exist integrated between the past and the present. In other words, those who live in the present benefit from what people had to teach in the past. And they learn from the voices of the past that these same areas have been plagued by natural disasters for centuries. And then they develop the scientific means to verify the testimony of the past. This is what the ancients tell us. Well, let's scientifically verify what the ancients claim. And once realizing that indeed these are regions that are prone to earthquakes, they don't simply start constructing on this land oblivious to the threat. No. The material they use, the building codes that they impose, they make sure that there is no corruption, so there is no cheating in the building codes. They make sure that if an earthquake does occur of the magnitude that did occur, that the buildings in this region will respond to the natural demands of Mother Earth. In other words, Mother Earth will do what Mother Earth has to do to live. But our charge, the way we discharge our obligation towards our Lord, is to make sure that when the calamity occurs, the disaster is contained. That tall, hardwired buildings are not simply going to collapse. And that we create procedures and resources that can quickly respond to whatever disaster does in fact occur. So it is immoral, simply immoral, to take the easy way out and to point to naturally occurring events and try to pin it on God and say, oh, God is punishing you because, as some people, quite simply pointed out in response to Muqtada Sadr, if this was such a vindictive God, then why didn't the earthquake occur in Sweden? It is part of maturing. It is part of being an ethically mature human being to understand the ethical dynamics that define our relationship to our Maker. Volcanoes and earthquakes, and indeed all forms of natural disasters, are naturally occurring. They could be, in theory, a punishment from God, but it is indeed an arrogant claim, an impious claim, an unethical claim to conclude that this, in this particular situation, indeed it is a punishment from God. It is like those who proclaim who is going to go to heaven and who is going to go to hell. That's not your business. That's God's business. The part that is your business is the ethical challenge that it presents to you as a society and individually. What type of moral duties, what type of moral lessons that teach you that the scale of destruction and the scale of misery could have been contained If people lived immoral, ethical existence in which they take responsibility for their moral failures and don't pin their moral failures onto God. I assure you that there are hundreds and thousands of people that will show up in the hereafter and be told quite simply, before you authorized such a building, before you built such a building, didn't you know that this region has a history of violent earthquakes? Yes or no? And if Allah knows that the answer is yes, well, how could you construct the building that you've constructed? Did you know that the building can withstand an earthquake of such and such scale? Mother Earth has a right to live. Mother Earth has a right to live. And it is exercising that right every day and every night. But it is not a part of the consciousness of Mother Earth who gets hurt on a surface, in the same way that it is not a part of your consciousness what happens when you scratch an itchy part of your body, to all the bacteria that live in the region that you've just scratched. Did you know? What did you do with this knowledge? Did you just ignore it and look at the short-term profit? Did you just say, well, let's solve the immediate issue of housing and let tomorrow take care of itself? But once the disaster has occurred, how have you responded? And that is also Allah's direct business. How have you responded? You are an ummah, collectively as Muslims, in which your leaders spend millions and billions of dollars on soccer, on games, on entertainment, on boats, purchasing expensive boats. Indeed, millions and billions of dollars on weapons, on killing innocent people living in Yemen, on buying tanks and airplanes and technology, billions and billions of dollars on catering to the life of the rich and powerful, billions of dollars on catering to luxury in the heart of Mecca and in the high rises of Dubai. Now that Allah allows for this test to occur, a naturally occurring test, how do you respond? Do you take care of one another? Do you rush to minimize the suffering and the pain? Or do you continue existing oblivious and uncaring? But even more, If your rulers are corrupt, your rulers are corrupt, what's your excuse? Do you hold these rulers accountable for their corruption? Do you condemn these rulers for their immorality in your heart? If nothing else, do you care? Do you care that these are the rulers that will spend millions and millions of dollars excuse us. Do you spend millions and millions of dollars? You are aware that these are rulers that spend millions of dollars on entertainers and on parties and all matters of frivolity and nonsense. But do you realize the moral outrage in your heart? What standard of morality do you hold not just your rulers, but your religious leaders and your imams and your teachers to? It is all an integrated, interwoven whole. Do you celebrate those who point the finger at moral corruption and say this is wrong? Do you celebrate and honor these people? Do you support and further these people? Do you promote and uphold these people? Or do you promote and uphold and celebrate those who have no moral conscience and those who do not object and do not protest and do not point the finger and do not talk about the corruption of rulers and do not talk about the immorality of wasting billions of dollars on nonsense and then balking when we see the suffering of fellow human beings like this? It is an interwoven whole. Who are the people that represent you? Is it the moral voices of the ummah or the amoral voices of the ummah? Who are you? And then when you prove your own amorality by supporting the voices that are amoral, meaning without moral conscience, those who continue praising and being praised by the very rulers who waste millions of dollars on pretty women and pretty cars and pretty yachts and pretty buildings, and those religious leaders who don't utter a peep, but you choose to celebrate those religious leaders and you ignore the religious leaders who testify as to truth and justice. And then when a calamity befalls you, an earthquake or the like, now, instead of occurring with those people far away, it's a calamity that crashes upon your head and the head of your loved ones. You finally wake up and see the way that you have been amoral and unethical? Or do you sit there and blame God and say, well, this is God's destiny, and what can we do? أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم واسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام وأفضل التسليم على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Natural calamities are naturally occurring. They're naturally occurring. They occur because they must occur. How you respond to them is a matter of choice and volition. And because it's a matter of choice and volition, anytime that choice and volition are involved, ethics are involved. When there is no choice, no volition, we can't speak of ethics. But anything that involves a choice of necessity involves morality. And the devastation of these earthquakes is indeed a test not just to the Muslim Ummah, but to humanity, and how humanity chooses to react. Do you react racially? Do you help to a lesser extent because these are people who are from a different race? Do you react within religious bigotry? Do you think, well, these are either our religion or not our religion, so that dictates whether we help more or less? How do you react? What lessons do you learn? When you find that the response to a disaster like this, for instance, by the very infamous, morally decrepit and bankrupt Charles Hebdo of France, the French magazine Charlie Hebdo, and these are the folks that publish the infamous cartoons, pornographic cartoons, making fun and insulting and degrading the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. Well, their morality allowed them to gloat over the destruction that has befallen Muslims and to publish cartoons that basically celebrate all the destruction and say, oh, wonderful, we didn't need to send tanks to do what we wanted to do. We're happy that an earthquake did it. But you, as moral, ethical human beings everywhere, how do you respond to the immorality and the racism and the bigotry of people like Charlie Hebdo and the French government that honors and protects them? Do you continue doing business with France as usual? Do you continue simply thinking, oh, well, everyone has the right to be racist? Everyone has the right to be a bigot? Do you react the same way when the racism is directed at Jews and it is anti-Semitism that we are talking about? Truly a test to humanity. But there is another level of this test, and that is in the same way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, upon being confronted with the human calamity, not natural calamity, but the human calamity of a brother murdering a brother, of Abel murdering Cain, Cain murdering Abel, Cain murdering Abel. Allah sends a bird to teach the criminal brother how to honor and protect the dignity of his deceased brethren. Someone sent me a story about a video that emerges from the midst of this ugliness. A dog emerges from the rubble. The dog has in its mouth the cell phone of its owner. And upon realizing that its owner is not emerging from the rubble, the dog sits there and, according to the witness that wrote the tweet, weeps. I have seen dogs weeping, and I've seen them weep when their owners are ill or dead. I've seen them abstain from eating when they're worried about their owners or sad about their owners. And I've seen them abstain from eating to the point of dying. Out of the midst of all this ugliness, the beauty of a dog testifies. The beauty of the encoded morality, encoded principles. The dog doesn't have volition, but the dog responds to the morality encoded within. The moral choices being made by its maker, so that its instinct responds to the moral choices made by its maker. And its maker, through this dog, teaches us an amazing lesson about loyalty. In Arabic, when one person wants to insult another, they call them a kalb. Well, I have disabused myself of this notion a long time ago. I am honored to be a kalb. I consider it no insult to be named a dog. Indeed, I welcome it. Because what is encoded within is truly beautiful. And yet, out of all of this, there are still Muslims, to our very day, that think of beautiful creatures that can constantly give us lessons in beauty and goodness, like dogs, to be haram, to be a najasa, to be something to be avoided. Listen to the lessons that Allah teaches you through the khair and through the shar, through good and through bad. Allah is constantly educating human beings, using the natural processes of existence to communicate, to educate, and ultimately to hold accountable. Pray for the victims of the earthquake. But don't limit yourself to prayer. Give everything you can give. Help in every way you can help. Care. So that when your turn comes, perhaps perhaps Allah will reciprocate the goodness with good. And you will find those who care about what happens to you in turn. But speaking of never-ending ugliness, ugliness that is not the choice of Mother Earth, but ugliness that is a direct result of human folly and human immorality. Again, and again, every single Jum'ah now, I simply read a tally of the number of Palestinians murdered by Israelis. Sharif Hassan Rabah, 22, the 43rd Palestinian killed since the beginning of this year, and we're just in February. 43rd Palestinian. And like many previous Palestinians killed, he was shot in the chest. Israeli soldiers said that they feared he was carrying a knife to stab them. But once shot, they didn't allow ambulances to come to his aid until he died. They didn't allow anyone to come close to him to verify whether he was armed or not. Witnesses said that he made no move towards the soldiers and he was simply minding his own business when he was shot. And like all the Palestinians killed, hundreds of them, the Israelis have no investigation and no consequences to the impunity. Right before this fellow, in a 15-minute raid by Israeli forces against a Palestinian neighborhood in Jericho, 5 Palestinians were shot dead, unarmed. Incidents after incident after incident. And what do you find? Do you find the United States saying this is unconscionable? It is undeniable that Palestinians are living under an occupation. It is undeniable that the Geneva Conventions say that what Israel does night and day is a violation of international law and a violation of human rights law. It is undeniable that an occupied people living under an occupation have a right to resist. But it is also undeniable that whether they resist or do not resist, that the Israelis systematically and consistently oppress them, murder them. It is undeniable that Israelis have grown so accustomed to oppressing Palestinians that even the most moral human beings who are otherwise moral, when it comes to Israel and it comes to the immorality of what Israel does, their moral sensors dull. And they no longer care, and they no longer are able to see violations of international law, violations of human rights law, no longer able to see or care. It is undeniable that this has become a problem of racism. One race consistently and systematically oppressing another race. And it is also undeniable that this is exactly under international law what apartheid is, and that what Israel has vis-a-vis Palestinians is a regime of apartheid. Yet, what does our government do? Our government sends the CIA chief, the chief of the CIA, to meet with Israelis and Palestinian Authority that has suppressed and oppressed Palestinians for the sake of Israel because they're paid off. Palestinian Authority has a abysmal human rights record, not against Israelis, but against Palestinians. And the CIA chief, instead of telling the occupier what you're doing is wrong, instead of saying that the occupied have a right to self-determination, have a right to dignity, have a right to existence, he warns of the practical danger of a third intifada. It's like saying to the oppressor, you know, the only problem I have with your oppression is that you might push the victim to protest more. And then it caught my eye that the city of Barcelona in Spain has taken the morally courageous position to cut ties with Israel, because Barcelona decided that Israel is indeed an apartheid state. And as usual, like a broken record, but I will testify until the day Allah takes the last breath out of this body. I don't just think of the betrayals of the Emirati and the betrayals of the Saudis and the betrayals of the Egyptians. I just don't think of the way that while we witness the apartheid regime systematically being implemented against Palestinians, and while we witness supporters of Israel accuse Barcelona and accuse everyone who testifies as to the truth of what's happening of anti-Semitism. So now, recognizing truth and reality has become anti-Semitism. My problem is not primarily the governments that have no honor, have no integrity, have no morality, have no ethics. But my problem is with the average Muslim who sees all of this and then looks around and sees lone voices of Muslim teachers and leaders speaking out against the apartheid and against the immorality, and then also sees other Muslim voices that only care about their relations to the wealthy elite in the Emirat and the wealthy elite in Saudi and the wealthy elite in Egypt. And those Muslims do what they're told and never speak about the apartheid and never testify as to anything remotely relating to what is true. They don't care if Palestinians continue being murdered every day. But then the average Muslim, having looked around and saw their moral choices, there is a moral choice. They can follow this religious leader or follow that religious leader. And sadly, The average Muslim, the average you out there, makes the immoral choice to follow the religious leaders that have chosen immorality over morality, that have chosen this dunya over the akhirah, that have chosen luxury and power and money. And then you sit there and you say, why Allah is not helping us? Why is our state as Muslims so horrible? Why is the news about Muslims so bad all the time? Because brother and sister, the answer is because of you. Because of you and your moral choices. I finally will again, for the millionth time, any of you who Allah has blessed with wealth out there, your immorality is astounding. Your immorality is of historic proportions. I cannot even bear to think what your accountability will be in the hereafter. Because you, like the average Muslim, look around and you see your moral choices, and you, with your money, can choose to support the voice that speaks up bravely, testifying as to truth, the voice that protests the apartheid, the voice that talks with reason and rationality and morality as to this religion, or support those who are morally bland, without backbone, without principle, those who are closer to shaitan than Allah, and you make a choice with your money. Your accountability before Allah in the hereafter is something that I cannot even bear to think about. May Allah truly have mercy on your soul. Allahumma afu anna, Allahumma aghfir lana, Allahumma ahdina li aqraba min hadha rashada, ya Ali ya Azim. Allah forgive our sins. Allah bless us with the straight path. Allah enable us to withstand the test of ethics and morality, the test of moral choice and moral choices that present themselves before us day and night. Allah give us the wisdom to be rational, not irrational, to be logical, not illogical, to be reasonable, not unreasonable, to be moral and ethical and virtuous Muslims. Ya Allah, Ya Ali, Ya Azim. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه يا رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة